Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 54th webinar on the Secret Doctrine. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Mori Federation webinars and webinar series in progress as shown here. All episodes of this and the Secret Teaching series are also now available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the program you're interested in watching. Okay. And one last thing about that is sometimes we go over, especially secondary references, like when we'll do readings from other sources pretty quickly. We just read them, maybe ask questions and go on. So pulling up these recordings can be really useful in terms of just stopping the video at that point and really taking a harder look at it. So that's another way you can use this. Okay, this month in our reading from Old Diary Leaves, Colonel Olcott is called to London to stop a kerfuffle, a potential breach in the London Lodge. This is really the first of the problems. There's going to be a few problems that come up over the next few years, including a big problem. But this one is in 1883, 1884, right at that cusp. And so he takes a train. So can we get a reader for this?
On the 5th of April, I left HPB and took the train for London with Mohini M. Chatterjee. As a serious dispute had grown up in the London Lodge between Mrs. Anna Kingsford, Mr. Edward Maitland, and their party on the one hand, and Mr. Sennett and the rest of the members on the other, about the comparatively superior value of the Indian teachings as compared with the Christo-Egyptian teachings, which she was giving out. And as it lay with me to settle it or see the members divided into two camps, as it were, I had issued from Nice a circular to each registered member of the London Lodge, asking them to send me separately to Paris in confidence their views respectively on the situation. These letters I had brought with me to read in the train. I had just come to a passage in the letter of Bertram Keightley where he affirmed his entire confidence that the masters would order all things well when, from the roof of the railway carriage above Mohini's head, a letter came fluttering down. It proved to be addressed to me and to be in the K.H. handwriting, giving me necessary advice for the treatment of the difficulty.
Okay, so here on the left is an actual fragment of Kuthumi's letters, precipitated letters. So can we get a reader, please?
Lynn, can you read that, please?
It was if intended as a marked response to the loyal thought of the writer of the letter I was reading at the moment. I wish that everybody in the society could realize how certain it is that those great brothers who are behind our work keep a vigilant eye upon all of us who, with a pure heart and unselfish mind, throw our energies into it. What more comforting than to know that our labors are not in vain, nor our aspirations unheeded. The trouble in our London Lodge, like all such misunderstandings, tended to increase and ultimately to disrupt the once harmonious group. It was imperative that I should put a stop to it, if possible, and this was my principal business in going over to London. If I had had the least doubt of it before, it would have been dispelled by a letter which I received phenomenally in my cabin on board the Shannon the day before we reached Brindisi, and in which it was said, "Put all needed restraint upon your feelings so that you may do the right thing in this Western imbroglio. Watch your first impressions. The mistakes you make are from failure to do this. Let neither your personal predilections, affections, suspicions, nor antipathies affect your action. Misunderstandings have grown up between fellows, both in London and Paris, which imperil the interest of the movement. Try to remove such misconceptions as you will find by kind persuasion and an appeal to the feeling of loyalty to the cause of truth, if not to us. Make all men feel that we have no favorites nor affections for persons, but only for their good acts and for humanity as a whole. A great truth was stated in the same letter, viz. One of the most valuable effects of Upasika's mission, HPB's mission, is that it drives men to self-study and destroys in them blind servility to persons. What a pity that some of her most ardent disciples could not have realized this, for they would have been spared the bitter pain that has caused them and all of us by the many successful exposures of her defects of character by opponents who accepted their foolish challenge and proved her to be the reverse of infallible. She was great enough and had quite sufficient claims upon our gratitude without our trying to make of her a goddess, immaculate and unerring.
So in this segment, we get a new name for HPB, and it's suggested here that this is the name she was known by among the masters. So this is, I think, quite interesting, a little insight into onto the other side, right? And she had all kinds of personality defects, but she was meticulously honest and loyal, and so she was really picked apart by her enemies. Anyway, next up, and this is Anna Kingsford, who is mentioned in this first part, right? So there was this rift in the lodge going on in London with Anna Kingsford and Edward Maitland on one side, and then Sennett and the rest of the members on the other. You might remember Sennett. We quoted him quite a bit in his different books like Occultism, The Occult Story, etc. So that's this person, Anna Kingsford, who started her own huge movement. Okay, reader.
Yvonne, can you read that for us, please?
In the London struggle in our branch, I had to deal with a learned, clever, self-confident woman, ambitious and eccentric, a unique personality who believed herself the angel of a new religious epoch, the reincarnation of Hermes, Joan of Arc, and other historic characters. By canvassing the opinions of all the registered members of the London Lodge, TS, I ascertained that as between her teachings and those of the Indian sages, the verdict was almost unanimous against her. It was not that they did not appreciate her great qualities as they deserved, but that they valued those of the masters more. Perhaps also they found her inclined to be too masterful for British notions. The first step was naturally to call her, which I did. I cannot say I altogether liked her, although it did not take many minutes for me to gauge her intellectual power and the breadth of her culture. There was something uncanny to me in her views about human affection. She said she had never felt love for a human being, that people had told her before her child was born to wait its appearance, and she would feel the great gush of mother love, and the fountains of her affection would be unsealed. She had waited, the child had been shown her, that her only feeling was the wish that they should take it away out of her sight.
Okay, and next up, reader, please.
Robert, can you read that, please?
Yet she lavished excessive love on a guinea pig, and in his life of Anna Kingsford, Mr. Maitland's splendid pen has made us all see, as in a mental kinematograph, his great colleague carrying the little beast around with her travels, lavishing on it her caresses and keeping the anniversary of its death as one does that of a near relative. The annual election of officers by the London Lodge was to come off on the following day, so I had no time to lose. I made Mrs. Kingsford the offer to give her a charter for a separate branch of her own, to be called the Hermetic TS, first having discussed it with Mr. C.C. Massey, her sincere friend and mine. The offer was accepted and the election passed off harmoniously. Mr. G.B. Finch being chosen president, Mr. Sinnott vice president and secretary, and Miss Arundel treasurer. Things were proceeding smoothly in the usual manner when they were interrupted by the sensational appearance of HPB, whom I had left in Paris, but who took a flying trip so as to be present at this meeting. The Kingsford Maitland party had notified me in advance that they would not be candidates for re-election to office in the London Lodge. TS presented me before leaving a formal application for a chapter for the new branch, which I promised to grant. On the 9th April, the meeting for organization was held at the chambers of Mr. Massey, and the Hermetic Lodge TS became an established fact.
Okay, a couple of things here, kind of interesting. First of all, the election that ensued where you had Finch as president, Senate as vice president. This is the normal TS Lodge, not Anna Kingsford's offshoot, right? Which was this other lodge, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, when I first read this, interrupted by the sensational appearance of HVB, whom I had left in Paris, but who took a flying trip so as to be present at this meeting. I thought, oh, he took the train, she flew over. And then I remembered this is 1883. So, or 1880, right at the cusp, 1883, 84. So there was no flights. And, the Wright brothers were in 1908. So it makes you really wonder, what was this flying trip? And the idea that it was a sensational appearance, it really makes you wonder how she got there. Anyway, just to bring that up. All right, that's it. Let's see here, get to my notes. Okay, so last month we finished HPB's commentary on the final verse of stanza 5, and we're well into a final review of the verse itself. I'm going to go ahead and read the verse to bring it into our present understanding. The Lapika circumscribed the triangle. The first one, the cube, wait a minute. The first one, the cube, the second one, and the pentacle within the egg. It is the ring called pass not for those who descend and ascend, as also for those who during the kalpa are progressing toward the great day be with us. Thus were formed the arupa and the rupa. From one light, 7 lights. From each of the 7, 7 times 7 lights. The wheels watch the ring. So let's pick up where we left off with the pentacle within the egg, which represents a circle. And I want to get right into this quote. In volume 12 of her collected writings, HPB gives us this illustration, very rare in that it was colored, of the pentacle within the egg, as described in the in this verse. So can we get a reader for this, please?
Carrie, can you read that, please?
You find here Paramatman, the spiritual sun, outside of the human auric egg, as also outside the macrocosmic or Brahma's egg. Why? Because though every particle and atom are, so to speak, cemented with and soaked through by this paramatmic essence, yet it is wrong to call it a human or even a universal principle. For the term is very likely to give rise to naught but an erroneous idea of the philosophical and purely metaphysical concept. It is not a principle, but the cause of every principle, the latter term being applied by occultists only to its shadow, the universal spirit that ensouls the boundless cosmos, whether within or beyond space and time. The plate shows, moreover, Buddhi, the yellow semi-disk, serving as a vehicle to that paramatmic shadow to be universal, and so also is the human Atman, the sun or white sphere above Buddhi. Within the blue auric egg, we find the orange macrocosmic pentacle of life, Prasa, containing within itself the red pentagram, which represents man. Have you noticed that while the universal pentacle has its point soaring upwards, the sign of white magic, in the human red pentacle, it is the lower points which are upward, forming the horns of Satan, as the Christian Kabbalists call it. This is the symbol of matter, that of personal man, and the recognized pentacle of the black magician. For the red pentacle does not stand only for karma, the fifth principle, exoterically, but is made also to represent physical man, the animal of flesh with its desires and passions. So far, I have given you only one of its explanations, namely that which refers to human and not to macrocosmic principles. The orange pentacle may be taken for both the universe and man, but for the present we shall consider the latter only.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Any thoughts or questions about this? A lot of provocative material here. I love this illustration. A special note is the macrocosmic orange pentacle within the egg representing life itself, right? Which is applicable to both the universe and to humanity. So I hope you see the connection with the idea of the auric egg here that's described right here at the top of verse 6. Lopika circumscribe the triangle, the first one, the vertical line. The circumscription is this auric egg seen on a universal level, right? We can also see this as the consciousness of a human being, right? With the Buddhic principle bridging to the unknown, to the Atmic or the Param Atmic, which is just the universal version of it, right? From which all principles emanate. Okay, next up, it is the ring called Pass Not, for those who descend and ascend. So we've talked a lot about the ring Pass Not, inscribed by the Lopika lords, represented here as the egg or circle that contains within it all manifested life. So interestingly, the last of the 5 digits that define pi is the number 5, symbolized by the 5-pointed star of life, made up of those who descend and during the involutionary arc and ascend during the evolutionary arc. In other words, all the units of consciousness manifest during a Manvantara, but with a particular focus on humanity, because all of this philosophy is derived, is sort of anthro-centered, right? It's oriented towards the human evolution. And then that was, next up we have, as also for those who during the Kalpa are progressing toward the great day be with us, seems to single out disciples and initiates who are consciously striving towards oneness with deity. One's evolutional journey is frozen in situ during a systemic pralaya. Nonetheless, one's spirit essence participates in the great day be with us. Next, thus were formed the Arupa and the Rupa, the formless world and the world of forms. The Arupa is pure deity, that which lies within the circumscribed triangle shown up here, or described up here, and is described, this is probably our best description of what this triangle is, right? Comes from stanza 4, verse 5, right? You have this source of all called darkness, the boundless, or no number, and then who carries within it. Remember, this is the triangle that is circumscribed. So here you have the 3 points of the triangle, right? So from no number, you have number, for he is one, the number, right? And then you have this emanating quality in the Lord of, in the voice of the Lord Svabhavat. The number is, so you have source in no number, the number, and then that which emanates from him, the numbers, for he is 1 and 9, which is the sum total of all numbers. And then finally, you have the formless square. And these are enclosed within the circle. These enclosed in the circle are the sacred four, including the boundless itself is part of the, is the four. So this is what's being described here in when the circumscription of the triangle, okay? Let's see, next. The one, from one light, 7 lights. So as stated way back in stanza 3, Ohu the younger, who is the one in this previous slide, right? It's this, for he is one. Who is 4, takes to itself 3, and the union produces the 7. Here's a more complete description. Could we get a reader, please?
Greg, can you read that, please? We're not hearing you. I see you're unmuted, but we're not hearing you. Is your headset muted or something?
Could always be.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Stepping out of the circle of infinity that no man comprehendeth, Ein Sop, the Kabbalistic synonym for Parabrahm, for the Zerona Akern of the Mazdians, or for any other unknowable, becomes one. The Ichad, the Ika, the Ahu, then he or it is transformed by evolution into the one in many, the Dhyani Buddhas, or the Elohim, or again the Amshaspens, his third step being taken into generation of the flesh, or man.
Okay, so just to relate this, God, I can't go backwards. That's right, I can't go backwards. That's not true. Wait a minute. Yes, I can. Here we go. So the stepping out of the absolute or the boundless, right? That's when it said that. Where is it here? Stepping out of the circle of infinity that no man comprehendeth, and then he gives all these names. That's this place right here, right? The boundless, this darkness of no number, right? That from which all principles come forth, right? So then from that quality called the one emerges, you know, Oya, Ohu, the younger, and then we have these other names, the Ika, the Eka, the Ahu, who is further transformed by evolution into the one and many, which are in fact the 7. Okay, and that brings us to our comment here from each of the right. From one light, 7 lights. So that's where that is situated, right? Okay, next. From each of the 7 times 7 lights. Okay, 7 times 7 times 7 equals 343, which numerologically equals 10. You know, you don't use normal math in numerology. So 3 plus 4 plus 3 equals 10, which numerologically equates to the sum total of all. That's all of manifestation 10 represents, which is means that the 343 is a literal number, but it's also representative of the sum total, which manifests in terms of that primordial 7, from which comes 7 each, making 49. And then the third level of manifestation giving us 343. Okay. DK addresses the significance of this number twice in a treatise on cosmic fire. Not many numbers get this. Whoops, where are we going here? Yeah, here it is. So not many numbers get this kind of a treatment, but he really focuses in. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Martha, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. It must be remembered that every scheme has 7 chains, that each chain has 7 globes, making a totality of 49 globes, that each globe is again, in turn, occupied by the life of the Logos during what we call 7 rounds, making literally 343 incarnations, or fresh impulses to manifest. Just as each plane has its 7 subplanes, so likewise, each subplane can be subdivided, thus making 49 fires on every plane, or the 343 fires of the solar system. Herein can be found the clue to the mystery of the 4th between the 3, which has at times bewildered students of the occult records. There are several ways of reading these figures, 343, but the only occult method which can be hinted at here lies in the recognition of the 3 higher planes and the 3 higher planes, the 3 lower planes, the 4th plane of meeting between them. This 4th plane has occultly been called the meeting place. When it is remembered that the goal for these gaseous devas is the 4th cosmic ether, or the Buddhic plane, and that they in their major and minor groups, are the internal macrocosmic and microcosmic fires, some idea may be gained as to the true significance of the eventual at-one-ment between the 2 lines of evolution. For the goal for man, likewise, is the Buddhic plane.
Okay, so that's fine. It's all from Treatise on Cosmic Fire. So we can see that this, this isn't a number 343 like we normally think of a number. It is somewhat that in through the divisions of 7 times 7 times 7, but then he takes it further. He shows us that the number itself is a symbol for that place that lies between the higher and the lower, that intermediate space. It's also the place at the second principle, that which connects the highest to the lowest. And we get a couple of examples of that, like the Buddhic plane, where the Devic and the human kingdom meet, as well as the 3 higher planes can be related to the 3 lower. I mean, you literally have this in the spiritual triad being related through the soul to the which is Atma Buddhi Manas, to the three sheaths of the personality, right? The mental, astral, and physical, that those are related through this fourth subplane. We also know that we take our stance on the fourth subplane of the mental plane, where the mental unit is, and reach upwards into the higher, ultimately bridging through the Antakarana, in order to inform the lower. So this is a deeply significant number. That's why I wanted to take the time to take a look at it. Any thoughts or questions?
Yes, Greg's got his hand up. Go ahead, Greg.
When you break it down, numerology has different variations, but you can break the 1-0 down to the 1, because 1 and 1-0 are one and the same. So 1-0 becomes all that is. It becomes the absolute. It becomes the very first impulse, and everything emerges out of that, because you can just reverse it and go back to the same thing on the other end. So instead of reading from left to right, you can start with, and if you add equals 1, then you can go right to left and say 1, then equals 1-0, then 3-4-3, then 7 by 7 by 7. So out of that one absolute place, everything else emerges.
That's, very well said, Greg. Indeed. That's the beauty of numerology, is there's kind of a built-in philosophy that you can discern as a result of following through with the numbers. So as you say, if you put an equal sign here and a 1, what you've done is moved from the sum total of manifestation, which is what this 7 times 7 times 7 represents, right? The sum total of manifestation, and moved it then to its source. You can even go further than that through the Fibonacci sequence, because there's actually 2 1s. Do you remember, even in this verse, we have the first one and the second one, and then the Fibonacci sequence, you also have that 0, 1, 1, 3, 5, etc. So you have the movement from 1 to the outer one, from the inner union of all to the outer expression of that union. So, okay, any other questions about this? I love this kind of topic. It's so interesting, seeing this number as a symbol, not just as a number, of that meeting place between, represents so much. It also gives a important meaning to the number 4 as the place between the higher and lower, not just the lower quaternary, which is how we often think of it. Okay, let's take a look at what MPH has to say about verse 6. Can we get a reader for the right side here?
Scott, can you read that for us, please?
The Lipikas begin the process of organizing. They also separate the permanent from the impermanent, giving to each its appointed place. They build the ring pass not, which is to separate cause and effect. This ring also is the outer boundary of cosmos and separates the gleaming, glistening bubble from the dark space that surrounds it. It can be called the invisible shell, which nothing can pass through until the great day be with us. Each of the primitive 7 great lights casts off 7 suns. Each of these casts off 7 planets. Each of these planets differentiates 7 globes within their own bodies. The globes and the wheels face the ring, prepared to follow the orders of the central light, which is their cause and ultimate.
Yeah, I really like his MPH's comments, because they often shift our perspective just a little bit. For instance, the ring described as the outer boundary of cosmos, separating dark, meaning subjective space, from the bubble of manifestation, which lies at the center, reverses the way it's usually thought of, where the location of the ring from being, we normally think of it as being interior to manifested life, right? It circumscribes the triangle, and then life is outside of that. But he gives us just as relevant a description of it being that the source lies outside this bubble, right? Which is in keeping with cosmological descriptions, where you have these nexus points of chaos, which form into, you could call them regions of manifestations, like solar systems, etc. And then between them is that which the Lepikas have shut off, right? Which is this place of source, or the absolutes. Interesting shift in perspective.
Okay, Francis?
Yeah.
We got a couple of comments. Trudy asks, please explain Kalpa.
It's just a time period. A great Kalpa, the great day be with the sea. Is it used here? Yeah, it's as to whether there's a specific, let's see what we can come up with here. Give you this is the Theosophical Glossary Online, fabulous source for all things theosophical. Okay, so we have, where are you? Still not there. All right. Here we go. Kalpa, from the verbal root KLRP, to be in order, a generalizing term for a period or cycle of time. So I was wondering if they would give a little more in terms of periods. We have that 311 trillion, 80 billion period, which is might be called a great Kalpa, though usually more associated with a Manvantara. But so anyway, hope that helps a little bit. It's just a cycle of time, great cycle of time, right? It would embrace, for instance, the entire period of a manifestation of a cycle, like even a scheme, or the chains within a scheme could be considered kalpas. Okay, let's see what else.
Yeah, I have
Yeah, go
a
ahead.
couple of more comments. Greg says, and here we have the 7 sacred planets, from Vulcan, Mercury, to Venus, to Jupiter, to Saturn, to Uranus, to Neptune.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, indeed. He made this very specific, which is great, because he brought it into our solar systemic focus. It's a much more universal verse. However, you have to remember that these verses, and it took a while to realize this, are oriented, the stanzas are oriented towards this solar system, not towards universal reality, though so much of it can be applied to the universe as a whole. But there are certain passages that definitely tie it to our solar systemic manifestation. Okay, anybody else?
And then, yes, Efrosini says, the day be with us. Is that the same with the day of judgment in Christian tradition?
No, not quite. The day be with us is the final dissolution of all differentiation, of the entire form aspect, and the return to our source. the coming back to unity, our inherent oneness with the absolute. Okay, that's the day be with us. And that happens at the end of a great cycle, ultimately only at the end of the cycle of an entire universe, right? Systemically, we are frozen in situ. And I'm sure there's some version of the day be with us because we're in spirit realm, not in form realm. So that the divisiveness, including the consciousness of divisiveness, is not in effect, right? Whereas the Christian day of judgment is quite a different thing. That represents, I think DK puts it in the next round, something, and that 3/5 of humanity will graduate into soul-infused consciousness and be dualistic. That is, it'll be oriented towards the monad, and the others will seek to be part of the of this humanity, and they will seek another opportunity, like even another humanity within the solar system. I've often thought when reading it that they may enter the Martian experience. Who knows? That's not described. And so that's a very, very different thing. They both describe a kind of epoch-making ending, but one is very conditional and the other is literally as an absolute return to source. Anyone else?
Yes, we have a couple more comments. Yvonne says Peruker has a definition of Kalpa.
Oh, good.
She
Do you want to
doesn't
give it?
go into what that is. Can you?
It's pretty much what you said. It says the difficulty with many Western students this is from Perucker, because it does not apply with exclusive meaning to the length of one time period. It's used, the fact that it is unavoidably used as a blind, like the word, the English phrase. It can apply to a culpa or a great culpa, which is frequently the name given to a vast period of time contained in a complete solar manvantara or complete solar pralaya.
Yeah, okay. So, it's very indefinite, and that's on purpose. So a great kalpa could be seen as a solar system, right? One manifestation of our solar logos. Whereas a kalpa, many, many, many kalpas within that period. I saw Scott's hand go up.
Yeah, we had a couple of other comments. So hold on just 1 minute, Scott, okay? Greg says, would this be during the 7th root race of the future?
Well, you're talking probably about the biblical event. No, I think it'd be before that, quite a bit before that. Well, no, gosh, I'm not sure how to answer that because we have a 7th root race that will be coming up on this globe. And my understanding of the true judgment day is that it takes place in the next round, which would suggest another set of, another pass through these 7 globes. So it would be past this relative perfection of this 7th root race of this globe. That's how I'm reading it, but I'm just putting, kind of what I know in one area and what I know in another together. I haven't read an absolute teaching on this. Okay, anybody else?
Scott, please go ahead.
I'm looking in the TCF, and they break it down. It's from the Theosophist. It goes on like 3 pages in small print at the bottom for a footnote on this. But basically what it says is 4 yugas constitute a Mahayuga, which is 4.32 million years.
That's a yuga though, not a kalpa, right?
The interregnum of 14 manus is 1,000 Mahayugas, which constitute a kalpa.
Oh, okay,
i.e. one
right.
day of Brahma
okay.
equal
A day
to
of Brahma.
4.32 billion years.
Say the number again,
4,320 million years is
Okay.
one day of Brahma and one Kalpa.
Okay, so it's and here's a great example of how TCF, and not just TCF, but DK in general has made what was general in the time of HPB and theosophy, like that theosophical glossary that we looked at. That's oriented. That's not a DK source. That's oriented towards traditional theosophy, right? So it's just an example of how he has pulled back a few more veils, right? So now we know something much more specific. So we have this yugas, which make up kalpas, which make up what finally? What's the final, Scott?
Yeah, this
Great kalpa, maybe?
for Kalpa, yeah, but it's one day of Brahma, 14 Manus. It may be, I got notes here that are saying it's maybe one planetary chain of 7 rounds, but also just one round. So I don't know. Now, those are my notes. So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. If you really, what's the page? Do you have that right there? The page number on that?
yeah, it's 39
Page
TCF.
39 in TCF, right? So you only have to read 38 pages till you get to it. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, it's good to know. It has come to be, it wasn't in these times, but it has come to be a specific number. And you know that esoterically, like among the Brahmins, that it's always been a specific number. They knew and have had this awareness, but it wasn't made public until DK's time. Okay, others?
One more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
An age of Brahma's age of Mahakalpa is the 311 trillion years. And it says, great as the period of the Mahakalpa seems to be, we are assured that thousands and thousands of millions of such Mahakalpas have passed, and as many more are yet to come.
Well, there you have it. No hurry, and yet make haste. Interesting. That's an astonishing thing, isn't it? So millions of these 311 trillion year great kalpas, right, will take place and have taken place.
Trillions of them, it is. Trillions of trillion.
Trillions of trillions. Yeah, it's kind of tilts big time. Okay, next.
Yvonne's got her hand up. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Okay, I have studied recently the chains and rounds in Moria, and from what I remember, we're in the 4th chain, 4th round right now. The apocalypse is supposed to take part in the 5th chain, 2nd round.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's not the next round, it's the next chain, 2nd round. Did you say 2nd round?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, 2nd round. 5th chain.
1st chain, 2nd round. We're 4th chain, 4th round now. Yeah.
Right. So, no need to walk the streets with your sign that says the world is coming to an end just yet. It's a ways off. Like we're talking many, many, many globes, each with its own 7 root races before that comes around. Humanity will at that point, the good news, it's actually good news. The good news is that at that point, humanity will have truly transcended the personality and will be moving into the next phase of its unfoldment. 3/5 of it will have, and the other 2/5 will move to another form of expression. In just a mere chain away. Thanks for that, Yvonne. Next up.
And Greg says it's galactic and or beyond the age of our galaxy.
Yeah, it's true. Those figures, that Scott was talking about, and the fact that there are trillions of these Mahakalpas, which are themselves 311 trillion, 80 billion years, that there are trillions of those to come. It really does take you into, constellation level time frames. I mean, if you think about it, I think the universe now scientifically is the length is given at something like 13 billion, isn't that right? 13 billion years, which is a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the time frames we're looking at. So you have to realize that that's just, if we give science its due and just say that's accurate to whatever extent it is, that that's just one manifestation, that's one body, one incarnation of this whole that we can see, which you can call a universe, and so therefore it's not relevant to these greater figures that we're looking at, these kalpas and great kalpas, right? And so because they represent literally trillions of incarnations of the universe. It's really incomprehensible. Okay, anyone else before we go on?
Nope, that's it for now.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of verse 6. Any thoughts or questions? It's quite an important verse within this this stanza, right? So any questions? This finishes our considerations of stanza 5. What a journey it's been, which details the manifestation of both the primordial 7 and the Lipika through the agency of Fohat. That's what this has been about. Next up, the 7 verses of stanza 6. To gain insight, to gain a sense of the continuity between stanza 5 and stanza 6, it's often like we're like ants crawling across the lawn, right? To get any sense of perspective of where we've been and where we're going, we have to read these summaries. So let's take a look at this. Could we get a reader, please?
In stanza 5, the process of world formation is described. First, diffused cosmic matter. Then the fiery whirlwind, the first stage in the formation of a nebula. That nebula condenses, and after passing through various transformations, forms a solar universe, a planetary chain, or a single planet, as the case may be. The subsequent stages in the formation of a world are indicated in stanza 6, which brings the evolution of such a world down to its 4th great period, corresponding to the period in which we are now living.
So that's where we're going with this stanza. Before we begin HPB's commentary, there's a footnote concerning verse 1, way back on page 32, where the stanza is first introduced, which reads, verse 1 of stanza 6 is of a far later date than the other stanzas, meaning that we're not talking about the period of time when it's talking about. We're talking about when it was written, or the source info that she got it from, right? So it's a far later date than the other stanzas, though still very ancient. The old text of this verse having names entirely unknown to the Orientalists would give no clue to the student. Okay. So now let's take a look at HPB's commentary on verse 1. First of all, let's read the verse. Can we get a reader, please?
Lynn, can you read that, please?
By the power of the Mother of Mercy and Knowledge, Kuan Yin, the triple of Kuan Shi Yin, residing in Kuan Yin Tian, Fohat, the breath of their progeny, the son of the sons, having called forth from the lower abyss, the elusive form of Xincheng and the seven elements.
So, pretty clearly this is from a Chinese source, not from a Tibetan source. Very interesting. Kind of adds credence to the whole thing, Okay. So, oh, I see what I'm doing. Okay, shall we do this? Yeah, I think it's worth doing this. Let's just read right through the verses one at a time. I was wondering what was up here. Could we get a reader, please?
Martha, can you read this one?
The swift and the radiant one produces the seven Leia centers, against which none will prevail to the great day be with us, and seats the universe on these eternal foundations surrounding Xinjiang with the elementary germs.
Thank you, Martha. And reader, please.
Carrie, can you read that one, please?
Of the seven, first one manifested, 6 concealed, 2 manifested, 5 concealed, 3 manifested, 4 concealed, 4 produced, 3 hidden, 4 and 1 sun revealed, 2 and 1 half concealed, 6 to be manifested, 1 laid aside. Lastly, 7 small wheels revolving, one giving birth to the other.
Thank you, Carrie. And next up.
Greg, can you read that one, please?
He builds them in the likeness of older wheels, placing them on the imperishable centers. How does Fohat build them? He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them and round them, infusing life thereinto, then sets them into motion, some one way, some the other way. They are cold, he makes them hot. They are dry, he makes them moist. They shine, he fans and cools them. Thus acts Fohat from one twilight to the other during 7 eternities.
Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. Okay, next up.
Yvonne, can you read that one, please?
Sure. At the fourth, the sons are told to create their images. 1/3 refuses to obey. The curse is pronounced. They born on the fourth, suffer and cause suffering. This is the first war.
Okay, number 6.
Scott, can you read that one, please?
Okay. The older wheels rotated downwards and upwards. The mother's spawn filled the whole. There were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously.
Thank you. And number 7.
Robert, can you read that one, please?
Make thy calculations, Lanu, if thou wouldst learn the correct age of thy small wheel. Its fourth spoke is our mother. Reach the fourth fruit of the fourth path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see.
Okay, so you can see we're looking at a very, very different stanza than stanza 5. This really takes us into manifestation, into the nitty-gritty, balls of fire and all. I wonder if Little Richard knew. Okay. So this is that footnote I read earlier. I got ahead of myself here. So let's take a look at HPB's commentary on verse 1. First up, the first footnote, which references the first phrase of the verse itself, which reads, by the power of the Mother of Mercy and Knowledge, Kuan Yin. So could we get a reader on the footnote that references that phrase?
Carrie, can you read that, please?
This stanza is translated from the Chinese text, and the names as the equivalents of the original terms are preserved. The real esoteric nomenclature cannot be given, as it would only confuse the reader. The Brahmanical doctrine has no equivalent to these. Vach seems in many an aspect to approach the Chinese Kuan Yin, but there is no regular worship of Vach under this name in India, as there is of Kuan Yin in China. No exoteric religious system has ever adopted a female creator, and thus woman was regarded and treated from the first dawn of popular religions as inferior to man. It is only in China and Egypt that Kuan Yin and Isis were placed on a par with the male gods. Esotericism ignores both sexes. Its highest deity is sexless as it is formless, neither father nor mother, and its first manifested being, celestial and terrestrial alike, become only gradually androgynous and finally separate into distinct sexes.
Thank you, Gary. Any thoughts or questions about the footnote before we get into analysis? Okay, first up, this stanza is translated from the Chinese text, and the names as the equivalents of the original terms are preserved. This is the first reference to the original language of the stanzas since the introduction of the Secret Doctrine, which gives a fuller description. Could we get a reader, please? This is going way back to the introduction of the Secret Doctrine.
Lynn, how's your Chinese? Please read. We can't hear you, Lynn.
You're clicking, but no voice.
Yeah, Lynn, your microphone's muted.
Let's move on.
Okay, all right. Martha, can you read that, please?
My Chinese is terrible. One of the greatest and withal the most serious objections to the correctness and reliability of the whole work will be the preliminary stanzas. How can the statements contained in them be verified? True, if a great portion of the Sanskrit, Chinese, and Mongolian works quoted in the present volumes are known to some Orientalists, the chief work, that one from which the stanzas are given, is not in the possession of European libraries. The Book of Dzyan is utterly unknown to our philologists, or at any rate was never heard of by them under its present name. This is, of course, a great drawback to those who follow the methods of research prescribed by official science. But to the students of occultism and to every genuine occultist, this will be of little moment. The main body of the doctrines given is found scattered throughout hundreds and thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts, some already translated, disfigured in their interpretations, as usual, others still awaiting their turn. Every scholar, therefore, has an opportunity of verifying the statements herein made and of checking most of the quotations. A few new facts, new to the profane Orientalist only, and passages quoted from the commentaries will be found difficult to trace. Several of the teachings also have hitherto been transmitted orally, yet even those are in every instance hinted at in the almost boundless volumes of Brahminical Chinese and Tibetan temple literature.
Thank you, Martha. Any thoughts or questions on this?
I just had an observation, but it's not very well shaped. It's that instead of narrative, the science of empirical, we do the science of analogy. And therefore, these patterns, we look for patterns to verify. Wouldn't you say that's what we're doing? That when you see these patterns of explication in so many different traditions, isn't that our validation? Or
Yeah, I think, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think that is prominent, at least in our method of validation. And it has, that's a valid method, because, you have ultimately you have as above, so below. So there is a lot of information about that which is, quote, beyond knowing, unquote, available to us by analyzing the patterns that we are subject to, that we do have available to us. But ultimately, I always think of the difference between, even the highest of our languages, like, this one, Gwen Shangzu, and something like Sinzar, which is a language of the intuition and gives one direct knowing. And through its symbols, one is actually impressed with the actual reality itself. So until that time, we have to use all these tools at our disposal, metaphors, analogies, and comparisons, in order to, come up with any truth at all, any sense of the truth. Okay.
All right. Greg's got his hand up, but first, Sri Yantra says it's interesting given that Chinese language did not have a pronoun for females until the language Mandarin was revised by Mao Zedong.
Yeah, and that goes to reinforce, what HPB was saying here about the lack of a female creator among most religions, But interestingly, that same language that didn't have a pronoun for the feminine did recognize Kuan Yin. So, okay, anyone else?
Yes, Greg's got his hand up. Go ahead, Greg.
I was thinking about this. We always talk about as above, so below, and that would be the vertical axis in which the Chinese write from top to bottom, whereas when we, but then there's also as within, so without, and that's more of a horizontal representation of potentially the same thing, but it's not the same thing because we're expanding outward it's horizontal versus the vertical. So, and we read from left to right, and it's very few religions, except maybe the Jewish faith, that read from right to left. But in any case, it's something to keep in mind, because as within, so without is a little bit different. It goes into the deeper heart of who we are and what we're trying to understand from a subjective and an objective point of view.
Yeah, I think it's useful to always keep in mind, this is, I find this of particular interest, this idea of the metaphor, because that's what we have to remember. The direction is metaphoric in its ultimate nature. Even when the directions first appear, they're completely subjective. The four Maharajas are the great potencies that are represented by the directions, right? And the directions had very symbolic meanings in ancient literature. Two of them were considered like winds. Any wind from the north was considered not a good thing. It was if it, you know, it bore evil on its. So there was subjective qualities related to these directional aspects, you know, in their subjective sense. Of course, you know, then there's the absolute objective sense of you know, the direction of the compass. But at the source of that are the four great potencies that allow manifestation to take place. And if you remember, we were on this for quite a while in the Secret Doctrine. It's like 15 pages. If each of these Maharajas had a host to enforce the potency of that particular direction. So the inward outward aspect is a quite different paradigm. You know, you would have to say, as within, so without, if you're going to have it parallel, as above, so below, because the inner is the source place, right? Yeah, anyone else?
Yes, we've got a couple more comments. Let me see. There we go. Carrie says DK always addresses his female disciples as brother.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? You know, this brings up this, we're not going to spend a lot of time in it. We can spend the whole rest of the time on it, but gender is a function of being in a physical body, you know, in terms of the teachings. When you are referencing the life that dwells within that outer form, it uses the concept of spirit or deity being the male aspect and the female aspect being the form. I know that this, you know, can rub people the wrong way if you're, you know, because especially in these times where there's so much struggle with equal rights and women's rights, but it's a philosophical concept. And here's the thing that makes it work. We are all in a female body from the point of view of the fact that we're in a form. So everyone inhabits the form aspect, and everyone has their monadic or source self, which is the male aspect. So we're in that way identical. Only in the very last aspect of reincarnation do you have this gender shift, you know, this gender variation, right? And I don't, somebody told me there was something like only 6% or 3% of the cells in the body are actually gender oriented. All the rest are uni-gendered. So, okay, that's my definition of that.
Okay, we have a couple. Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
Shriyanta says yes, and DK says somewhere in hierarchies that the language of AAB's time will and must change to suit the times. It isn't always the case.
Yeah, okay, but you know, I take I will defend DK's use of the method. I know, you know, we study DK. I have 2 classes a week on DK, and you know, this always comes up, you know, and it just, all you have to do is look at the Great Invocation. It's, you know, it's full of the term men, M-E-N, you know, and people have revised it to become gender neutral. And I recognize that it's a, in some ways, unsolvable problem, but I'll go back to defending DK's use of that. You think he didn't know the difference? Of course he did. He wasn't a product of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. He's a product of a universal awareness. And in that universal awareness, the spirit gender, quote unquote, is male. And the feminine gender is the form aspect. So, and he follows that. And there are many times when he uses the term men and women, when he's literally talking about reincarnated people or incarnated people, he uses the term men and women, right? So usually when he uses the term men, he's talking about the spirit aspect. But, I also recognize that it is a problem, and possibly a solution can come in future revelations of the teaching. Who knows? Okay, anyone else?
Yes, a couple more comments. Yvonne said monad is will, and that's masculine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the will aspect. But even that term is full of problems. It's really identification with the deity aspect. Right? That's its true meaning, that first-rate quality. And that equates with power, meaning the power of the inner source, not power demonstrated from the point of view of any kind of incarnation, the powers it demonstrates in the incarnation. So it's the most tricky of the three, intelligent activity works, love wisdom works, but will and power, you really have to interpret that for it to work. Okay, anyone else?
And then Greg says, biologically speaking, the only difference between men and women is the Y chromosome. And the Y forms such a small part of the greater organism, relatively speaking. He says we all start feminine prior to the effect of the Y chromosome that later takes over the organism.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, it's much more of a social than a biological reality, this gender difference, but anyway, we could have a discussion about this, but I think
Okay, one more comment from Scott. He says monad is positive to the negative soul. The soul is positive to the negative body form.
Exactly. And every hierarchy, and there's 12 hierarchies, is each hierarchy is positive to the hierarchy beneath it, which is what Scott just described. So the fourth or human hierarchy, which is the hierarchy of humanity, which is monads, is positively charged to the hierarchy, the fifth hierarchy beneath it, the crocodiles, the Makara, the kingdom of souls, right? And each hierarchy draws the hierarchy beneath it towards it, right? All the way up the line. And that is the nature, the true nature of the duality that we've been discussing. Thanks for that, Scott. Anyone else?
Nope, that's it for the moment.
Okay, so there are 3 references to language here, none of which specifically reference the stanzas. Only in the footnote we are now considering does HPB assign a language to one of the stanzas. And until I reread this footnote, it was my understanding that the stanzas were originally in Sinzar. We know that HPB had access to Sinzar writings from this short quote early in the Secret Doctrine. What is that which was, is, and will be, whether there is a universe or not, whether there be gods or none, asks the esoteric Sinzar Catechism. And the answer made is space. But perhaps the most intriguing reference to a Sinzar document comes from the letters of H.P. Blavatsky to A.P. Sinnott. Can we get a reader for this?
Scott, can you read that, please?
Colum stole a queer-looking paper, gave it to the missionaries with the assurance that this was a cipher used by the Russian spies. They took it to the police commissioner, had the best experts examine it, sent it to Calcutta for 5 months, moved heaven and earth to find out what the cipher meant, and now gave it up in despair. It is one of your flap doodles, says Hume. It is one of my censor manuscripts, I answered. I am perfectly confident of it, for one of the sheets of my book with numbered pages is missing. I defy anyone but a Tibetan occultist to make it out, if it is this. In all events, the missionaries have done their best to prove me a Russian spy and have failed, while Mr. Hodgson has proclaimed me one publicly.
Thanks, Scott. Just astonishing. But fortunately, we had this letter because this is the only place I could find where she verifies that she actually was in possession of Sinzar manuscript. Not only that, but that it was a physical page, not as she usually sees them, which is on astral or etheric astral levels. This, because this horrible person, Colomb, actually stole this. So I found it interesting. Okay. So
Francis,
yeah.
sorry.
Okay.
Jan says there needs to be magnetism to balance and return to the source. Something I heard this past week, but cannot remember the source.
Oh yeah, that's a basic tenet, and it goes back to what Scott was saying about the positive polarity of the soul drawing forth the negative aspect of that which is oriented towards and the emanation of that soul, right? And then you have the same thing as you go up at each stage. So that's absolutely true, what you're saying about the magnetism. And even more so, when we repolarize our centers, what happens is at this point, I'll say, in personality reality, the lower centers are negatively polarized to the environment. Therefore, they draw in experience, and the positive centers are positively polarized. But when you make the movement from the solar plexus to the heart, you get roughly speaking, there's also the process of the sacral center to the throat, which is part of this, and the awakening of the Ajna center. But when these shifts are made, there's a fundamental shift in the polarity of the centers, and you then become positively polarized in the lower centers, and therefore emanate the light of the soul. The higher centers are negatively polarized to the positive aspect of the soul, which then draws that energy in, which is then expressed through the personality sheaths, right? That's called the soul infused personality. So that's, a little under the hood, so to speak, of how that magnetism works. Okay, next up, the real esoteric nomenclature cannot be given, as it would only confuse the reader. Confusing, we might assume, because none of the names would have reference to any known esoteric system of spiritual thought, as stated here, right? The Book of Dzyan is utterly unknown to philologists, or at any rate was never heard of by them under its present name. But almost certainly the real reason for not using the original names is that they are secret. They have great potency inherent in the names themselves and are not for public consumption. Next, Vash seems in many an aspect to approach the Chinese Kuan Yin, but there is no regular worship of Vash under this name in India, as there is of Kuan Yin in China. Let's take a look at an excerpt from the Theosophical Glossary, which describes both Vash and Kuan Yin. This is Vash, by the way. I don't know why I didn't title it. Over here on the left. Can we get a reader, please?
Yvonne, can you read that, please?
Vash, sound, voice, word, the mystic sound, svara, or essence of spirit of the divine creative activity, the vehicle of divine thought. And of this, the word is the manifested expression. Vash, or its equivalents in other cultures, is always considered feminine. Cosmically, she is the carrier or mother of the third logos, the word or verbum, because of carrying perpetually within her the essence of divine thought, the first logos, and hence Vash is the second logos, equivalent to the early Christian Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost. In Hindu mythology, Brahma separates his body into masculine and feminine, the feminine becoming Vash, in whom he creates Viraj, who is himself again Brahma. Here we have the three logi: Brahma, the first logos, the divine thought; Vash, the second logos, the divine voice; and Viraj, the third logos, or the divine word, the philosophical equivalent of the Son of the Christian Trinity. Hence, Vash is associated with the work of creation, with the Prajapatis. She calls forth the Mayavi form of the universe out of the abstract space or chaos of which the first cosmogonical stage are the seven cosmic elements. It is through her power that Brahma produced the universe. Blavatsky points out that Brahma produced through Vash in the same way that the incomprehensible assumes a tangible form through speech, words, and numbers. Vash, through her productive powers, produced what Pythagoras called the music of the spheres.
Thoughts or questions? It comes at a good time in terms of a discussion about the feminine aspect, doesn't it? And I want to relate this to, let's see here, get this back over here. I want to relate this to way back here where we were looking at this. Right, so you have Brahma, often called Brahman with an N, for this boundless no number. And then you have the Oyahu the younger, who is the new Brahma. And then here is the voice, the aspect of the voice. This is the Vash principle on this high cosmological aspect, right? So I just wanted to bring that forward. Now I'll never find where we just were. Did that. Here we are. Okay. So yeah, there's really a lot of connective tissue in here in terms of, looking at the Chinese and comparing it to the traditional theosophical. And whenever you get that, you get more insight, right? Ultimately, we're talking about the vehicle of divine thought, and that vehicle is the word, manifested expression that we call the word, right? Okay.
Francis?
Yeah.
Efrosini says it is strange that the lords of karma, the Lapikas, precede the mother of mercy in knowledge in creation, that the scribes come before the word or voice.
Are you looking? I think she's looking at what we were just looking at. Yeah. Oh, well, no, not necessarily. Let's see. If you go back here, gosh, I'm just going to copy this and bring it forward. Yeah, let me copy this and bring it forward to here. Okay, so if you see here that the very next in verse 6, the Lapikas come into being. So the voice precedes the Lipikas. But let's see if we go back here. Yeah, her place is that as an expression of the initial Brahma, she calls forth the form of the universe out of abstract space. Let's see. I'm trying to find where you're getting your chronology there. Brahma separates his body, masculine, feminine. Feminine comes. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're referencing when you say that the Lipika or the Lords of Karma come before her. Could you clarify that? Or just bring the question?
Can you unmute yourself and clarify, please? Oh, she
Maybe I may be wrong. I may be wrong.
Well, it's neither here nor there. The idea is that this really is the second logos. This is the first expression from the absolute, right? As described here, you have the boundless, and then from that you have the masculine outer principle, and then the voice of that outer principle, the voice of the creator. Basically, this is the 7 and 1 who is the creator, and then you have the voice of that, and as the voice, the numbers 1 through 9, which is all creation, comes into being. So it's part of the nature of the second logos. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, so we're continuing on this. This is just the beginning of this. Let's continue reading here. Could we get a reader, please?
Scott, can you read that, please?
The teachings of Pythagoras also speak of the hierarchies of the heavenly host as numbered and expressed in numbers. Vash is equivalent in some aspects to Isis, Aditi, Mula Prakriti, the waters of space, chaos, and the Kabbalistic Sephirah. Whether as Aditi or the divine Sophia of the Greek Gnostics, she is the mother of the 7 sons, the angels of the face of the deep, or the great green one of the book of the dead. These feminine logi are all correlations of light, sound, and ether. In many aspects, Vash approaches Kuan Yin, she of the melodious voice. Sarasvati, the goddess of divine wisdom, is a later form of Vash. The Hebrew Lagash is nearly identical in meaning with Vash as the hidden power of the mantras, the divine sound. But Vash, being also spoken of as the daughter of Daksha, the god who lives in all the kalpas, her Mayavic character is thereby shown. During the Pralaya, she disappears, absorbed in the one all-devouring ray. Vash is also called Savitri, the genatrix, the mother of the gods and of all living. She is identical to the human range, in the human range, with Eve, who is also called the mother of all living. Vash is often called Sanya, twilight, or also Satrupa, 100 forms, to describe the feminine logos unfolded into the 10 planes and subplanes of the universe. The cow is the symbol of Vash, for the cow has always been the emblem of the passive, generative power of nature. Vash is also mystic speech, by whom occult knowledge and wisdom are communicated to man, and thus Vash is said to have entered the rishis. She is called the mother of the Vedas, since it was through her power as mystic speech that Brahma revealed them.
Okay, anytime. Here she is with her instrument, her stringed instrument. So any questions about this? I find this a very beautiful method of describing the undescribable, right? It's key here is that she is the mother of the seven sons. Who are the seven sons? That's the seven emanations of the one, right? And the mother aspect is because the seven sons come into being through the word, right? So you have the father aspect, who's one, spirit, right? The creator. And then through the sound or the word, the specific word of manifestation, the seven sons, which can be seen as equated to the seven rays, seven aspects, come into being through that word, right? And then the same thing is described all through here, the idea that she's the intermediary, right? And even down here in the individual aspirant, that occult knowledge come from the source through the mother aspect or the Vash aspect as that which can be experienced, occult knowledge and wisdom, right? Yeah. Any thoughts about this?
Yes. Robert, hold on just 1 minute. Sri Yanta says, let me see, wait a minute. Okay, the cow, or sometimes horse, is also symbolic of the universes, reference the Vedas, the Rig Veda from memory.
Yeah, and the milk is often seen as the source of all life. It all comes from the milk that comes from this divine cow. The churning of the milk is a metaphor used in Hinduism, and in the churning, of course, you get curds, and those curds are the first specific entities, and there are these great beings that they, in the illustrations, I think I've shown them on this too, of these little beings swimming around in this great pool of milk, that's being churned. And it's, of course, a metaphor for this great second principle or second logos is the shining noumenal substance from which all is particularized or comes into form from. Yeah, anyone else?
Robert's got his hand up. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to that earlier discussion on the kalpas. That the Tibetan defines time as a succession of states of consciousness. So that when we talk about time in trillions of years for the day of Brahma, it's not, it's in a way, it's like a koan or a mind bender, because our years projected out into the life of Brahma is not really, doesn't make sense, because that's at a different level of consciousness, a different state of consciousness, just as a year for an ant or is different than a year from a human. So that phrase, when he says a succession of states of consciousness, can sometimes be confusing, but I think that's the way I think.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it's perception of time change, even as you move out of the physical body. They say that the nature of time for the disembodied person is completely different, and that time equation keeps shifting as you go towards source. So, it really makes almost random this idea of 311 trillion, 80 billion years. like you say, you can have a whole discussion about what that actually means. What does that mean? I suspect that the numbers are very symbolic of very much like that 343. And it describes realities, that those who have been schooled would pick up from just reading those numbers that aren't literal, sequence of time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think they serve as blinds too.
Yeah.
So
They're not any, all a blind is that which holds the secret of a higher reality through the form of another way of interpreting what's being said. So in this case, it would be, literal number of years all in a row amounting to 311 trillion, 80 billion years, when in fact that holds or reveals to those who can read the secret of the meaning of the length of this kalpa. I have no idea what that is or what those might mean. You can play around with the numbers, but there's an inner teaching there that's not available to us.
And that relates to what Martha was saying earlier in terms of the law of correspondences, that in the Tibetans, that early going in cosmic fire, he says the law of correspondences explains God to man. And linear language or other language cannot explain the relationship of God to man, but correspondences can.
No, that's exactly right. You have to use devices such as the metaphors, etc., in linear language in order to make it work. Okay, I'd like to finish this. I'd like to go on with the definition of Kuan Yin. What we are looking at here is the definition of Vaj, right, which is this second Logos, who is actually a anthropomorphizing the word, right? It's the manifested expression of deity, right? And then it goes more into that. Now here we get the Chinese perspective on the same principle. Could we get a reader, please?
Kuan Yin, Chinese, the Chinese Buddhist goddess of compassion. The female aspect of Kuan Shayin, referred to in the stanzas of Dzyan as the triple Kuan Shayin, residing in Kuan Yin Tian, because in her correlations, metaphysical and cosmical, she is the mother, the wife, and the daughter of the Logos, just as in the later theological translations, she became the Father, the Son, and the female Holy Ghost, the Sakti or energy, the essence of the three. Thus, in the esotericism of the Vedantins, Diva Prakriti, the light manifested through Asvara, the Logos, is at one and the same time the mother and also the daughter of the Logos, or verbum of Para Brahman, while in that of the trans-Himalayan teachings, it is, in the hierarchy of allegorical and metaphysical theogony, the mother or abstract ideal matter. Mula Prakriti, the root of nature, a correlation of Adi Bhuta manifested in Logos.
Avalokiteshvara.
That, thanks. And from the purely occult and cosmical Fohat, the son of the sun, the androgynous energy resulting from this light of the Logos. Kuan Yin, was that all one run-on sentence?
One quote from
Kuan Yin is the Chinese counterpart from one point of view of the Egyptian Isis, the Hebrew Bat Kual, the daughter of the divine voice, and the Hindu Vash. She is the male and female ad libitum, as Eve is with Adam, and she is a form of Aditi, the principle higher than ether. In Acacia, the synthesis of all the forces in nature. Thus, Vosh and Kuan Yin are both the magic potency of occult sound in nature and ether, which voice calls forth Xian Chan, the elusive form of the universe out of chaos in the 7 elements.
Could you read that again real quick, Bill? Just kidding.
No.
It seemed like quite a labor. It's a lot of difficult language here, as often happens in the Secret Doctrine. I want to focus in on the idea, and I know we're out of time here, but that, how can such a being be both the mother, daughter, and wife of deity? That's something to think about. If you think about it in terms of the creative sound, it's, it becomes, you can start to wrap your head around how that can be true, because deity also comes forth through the element of sound, hence the mother aspect. But we're going to have to leave it there, and we'll continue with the footnote next time. Much appreciated, you all. Can we get dates for the next one?
Sure. The next Secret Doctrine is going to be off schedule. It will be on 8 May, and we have it that way because of the conference. So, but that's actually in 2 weeks from now. And then the
Wait a minute.
Sto-
2 weeks. 3 weeks. There we go.
okay.
And you made my heart skip a beat there. Okay.
Yeah, Stoa is in 2 weeks.
That's
The
right.
Sacred Teaching of All Ages is on 1 May. Yeah. And both of them are at 7 p.m. GMT. So we hope to see you all there. And thank you for sharing your Easter with us.
Yeah, I was actually surprised as many came as did come. But hey, if you're a theosophist, what better way to celebrate Easter than studying the Secret Doctrine, right? So yeah, the conference starts, I believe, on the 10th. And so we're going to get these in the 2 weeks previous the conference starting. And then I hope you all will consider plugging into the conference. It's going to be some good stuff this year. So, all right, see you on the 1st for the Secret Teachings. Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.